This session will cover advanced configurations such as best practices on printing, access to on-premise resources, remote assistance, endpoint security, and advanced policy management. Just like last week, this session is being presented by Garrett Chandler and Tyler Duncan, education technical specialists at Microsoft. This session is also being recorded and will be sent out next week. There will be time for Q&A at the end, and both Tyler and Garrett will be in the chat throughout, so feel free to ask your questions as they come to you. If you have any licensing questions, you can reach out to help@oetc.org, and someone from the team will be happy to assist. And with that, I'll hand it off to you, Garrett and Tyler.
Awesome. Thanks, James, and welcome everyone. It's great to see so many of you coming back for the second series. We're excited to dive into more of the advanced configurations, and even last week we had an Ask on Troubleshooting, so we'll dive into that a little bit as well. So let's move ahead with the agenda. I'm actually, Tyler's going to take a more active role in presenting today. So I'm going to kick it off, and then I'm going to pass it to him, and then we'll kind of do some back and forth throughout. So it'll be a lot of fun.
A little bit of round robin.
That's right. I'll just do a quick review for those who didn't attend the 101 session. James actually dropped in the chat the link to the recording, so I highly encourage you to go take a look at that. So we are focusing on cloud native Windows endpoints. So this is helping you modernize your endpoint management strategy, specifically Windows devices, and taking a more active approach, a modern approach for managing these devices with cloud technologies only. So joining those devices to Azure AD and Intune. So we are going to review that a little bit, and then we are going to dive a little bit deeper. We'll talk about like Win32 applications, and ensuring from an IT admin experience, we are deploying applications the best possible manner for our end users, the most efficient manner for our end users. Then we'll talk about advanced configurations and troubleshooting. So we've got some deep dives into things like ensuring that you've got local admins rights set up on the devices, that you know what printing solutions are out there, things like that. And then finally, we'll talk about endpoint security, so managing these or securing these devices that are in the cloud. And then, as always, we'll do some next steps and some Q&A at the end. So with that, this is the high-level agenda. I should have just moved over to this one first, as I was talking about what areas we're going to focus on. Tyler's going to do a really good session on group management and talking about what is best practices around group management within Intune. There's a lot of questions on that last time, so hopefully we'll get some of those questions answered. And then, so most of the things that I already talked about, I really did want to kind of go back and just review really quick what we talked about on the last call, which was an introduction to Intune. So really solidifying what is Microsoft Endpoint Manager, right? It is a full-fledged cloud solution. It's an MDM, right? Mobile device management system that can manage all of your devices in your estate. So Windows, iOS, iPadOS, macOS, Android. We even had a recent announcement this week with our in development that we have some Linux management coming with Intune. So really excited for what's coming. So it is a full-fledged MDM. And when we think about our Windows devices specifically, right, we want to think about how we are managing those in a modern way. And so we took a more tactical approach to how do you actually get started with Microsoft Endpoint Manager? What are the first steps that we need to take to get that cloud native Windows device up and running, right? From deployment and then managing it afterwards. So we talked about Windows updates, we talked about application management, and then we talked about all the prereqs that we need to do for setting up the Intune environment. We also touched on autopilot and walked through what it would take to upload a device into the autopilot service and then deploy that device. So getting out of the imaging space or the operating system deployment space and moving more towards a provisioning kind of workload. So really good session. Again, the link is in the chat for you guys to go take a look at. And in this recording, if you're watching on YouTube later, we'll have that in the description below as well for you to go check out. So with that, I think we're good to get started. Tyler, is there anything you want to add on for what our audience can expect from today?
No, it's just we're going to try and do a little bit of a deeper dive and try and help explain this to our customers a little bit more efficiently so they can enjoy using our products.
Awesome. Well, I will turn it over to you and we'll get started.
Hey everybody. Well, I appreciate everybody joining the call today. My name's Tyler Duncan. So I work with the team here at Microsoft implementing, Intune, Autopilot, and some of our other systems here. And today I'm going to do a quick kind of demo and deep dive really quick on group management. That's a typical topic that a lot of our customers ask us. And one thing that I typically like to bring up is that there are two different portals that you'll be working with the Intune console. We typically call them Big Intune and Little Intune. I'm not quite sure where the name came about over the years. It's just what I've heard over the development from the development teams. And so whenever you hear the term Big Intune or Microsoft Endpoint Manager, we're referring to the main portal that was originally designed for like the corporate environment. And so Microsoft saw this need to be able to create a separate portal for Intune for Education. And what they did was they added a bunch of new features and capabilities into that to make managing those environments a little bit easier because they understood that educational institutions operated slightly differently. And so the slide that you're seeing right now is a portal view of what Intune for Education could look like with the group management and the hierarchy that it can perform. So here in the middle of the picture, I just grabbed a generic kind of flow diagram of what an organization might look like. You can kind of see how the tree kind of flows down and things kind of flow into each other. If you look at the Intune for Education photo, you can see a similar thing here where things are flowing down underneath one another. So for example, Pineview Public Schools hardware, if you applied a policy or an application at that level, it would flow down to all the other subgroups and devices underneath it. And Intune for Education is the only portal that will show it to you in this fashion. Now, having said that, there are some pros and cons to this system. And the reason why we like to show customers this is because you're probably moving from like on-prem AD, SCCM, co-management type of systems where you're used to collections. Or you're probably used to the Google Chrome Management Console where you're used to like your little OUs that you can drag and drop the different devices into and move them where you need them. So Intune for Education will help you kind of create the system similarly to that. Now, Azure AD is a flat architecture, which means it doesn't technically operate on OUs, but this system will help you emulate that. Now, you need to be cautious with combining policies and applications because, say, for example, you're applying two policies at the Pineview Public Schools hardware level, and those two applications to do two different things, and they're both applying to the same, registry keys, or they're both installing the same application but a slightly different way. You need to be very careful with those types of interactions. Typically, you want to actually deploy it to like a subgroup underneath to kind of prevent sort of conflicts that might pop up within the system. Another piece that's kind of an important thing to note, you can't have two autopilot provisioning packages applied to the same groups. And since the autopilot provisioning packages flow down, you have to keep in mind that you don't want to create two different conflicts because if you do, say, a self-deploy mode and you do a user deploy mode, you're going to get yourself into a little bit of a pickle where it's not going to know which one to pick. You always want to make sure you choose the groups in the lowest part of that hierarchy when you're deploying autopilot profiles or separating them out in their own groups and applying the specific group tagging process to that to make that process a little bit easier. Another big thing that I typically get questions on is group names. What happens if I change the group? Is it going to break the security? Is it going to break everything underneath? No, you can update the group names. That part is not an issue at all. And you can also change the memberships within the system without any issues. All it really will do is just if you move one group from one area to another and applications are deployed differently, it'll just auto assume those roles. The big reason why is because everything is tied to an object ID in the back end of the system. And that object ID is what controls those groups and how they're managed in Azure AD. And that is the part that you're unable to change. But just to kind of help understand, you can change the group name as many times as you want. Just make sure that you hit that little save button at the top left. You can also bulk import and export group information using the bulk import and export tool. And I'm actually going to share my screen for a moment to kind of show you this outline and what this looks like so that you can actually see it in the systems. Go ahead and share my screen. Make sure. All right, so hopefully everybody can see my screen. Garrett, is it showing my screen? Or are we still in the PowerPoint? Just
You are good, man.
All right, perfect. All right, so here we see our Intune for Education console. We go over to groups, and we can see here we've got the hierarchy that I was talking about earlier. And we can break this down and see all the subgroups underneath. Makes it a lot more simplistic when we're trying to think of how to deploy applications and policies. It's just going to make it easier with the transition for educational institutions. Now, I really quickly wanted to kind of show what this looked like on the big Intune side, or Microsoft Endpoint Manager. So Pine View. So if we go in here and we go to members, we can see that these groups are members of one another. So the system supports this, and you're able to do this and flesh this out as you want to. It's just that particular view where you have the carrots to break it down is a feature that's only available in Intune for Education. Now, to help everybody out, on the bottom right-hand corner of this, I included a number of links that kind of go to the Intune for Education portal, getting started with it, and adding bulk adding group members. But right here is that bulk operations, the import members and remove members and download members, and it will give you a little template file, and you just modify the CSV how you need to, and then you import it into whatever group you'd like. And then another piece about this that's really nice is what's called filters. So I'll just briefly touch into that real quick. Whenever you're deploying an application or a policy, there are certain situations where you might want to filter devices out. So say you have a model that you know doesn't support BitLocker, or a certain type of device like the SEs don't support like PowerShell scripts. You can create filters to control that, and we're going to go a little bit deeper into this later in the presentation, but to try and make sure you're only applying things to the groups and the devices that you want. So you can use filters to kind of break that up a little bit more. All right, so let me go ahead. Back up. Oh, Teams. All right, Garrett, and then if we could go to the next slide, please. All right, so the next piece that we typically like to go over with customers is how to package applications, because a lot of our customers ask, well, how do we do that? Like, you've given us the documentation, it doesn't just show up in our console, so how do we do that? So Microsoft understands that there are going to be a wide variety of different application types. You've got your executables, your PowerShell scripts, your batch files. There's just a variety of different ways that you're going to want to deploy applications. And so what Microsoft has done is they've created the Win32 app repackaging utility. And why that's important and kind of things to consider. So Win32 applications, the Microsoft repackaging tool more or less creates a wrapper around the installer. And it more or less takes all the information about that executable and then the silent switches that you're going to need to deploy it, because typically in these types of environments, you want to deploy it silently. So it imports all that information. You tell the package how you want it, or you tell the package to import the executable, and then from there you can give it a number of parameters of how you want it to act after the fact. So when you import it into the Intune console, it compresses this file into what's called an Intune Win, and that's what you'll import into the console for your Win32 apps. Now, I've gotten this question a few times too. Win32 does not mean 32-bit implicitly. It's just referring to executables and different type of application install types. Once this application is kind of downloaded, you use this repackager, it compresses it, and the other reason too, it encrypts it. And because in case you have a specialized application that you're paying someone to develop, and you want to make sure that it's protected from end to end, that's the other piece that it's doing. It's encrypting it in transit, so that way the file can't be intercepted, and from your machine up to the cloud, it's secured from end to end. Now, one other limitation of the system that we typically like to bring up is that there are 8 gigabyte package limitations for the applications that you might install. So when you're deploying an app, just make sure that when its final compressed state is done, that you're falling beneath the 8 gigabyte package. Now, if you do have a situation where you do need more than that, you can put in a support ticket, and sometimes Microsoft will raise it. It's just typically not a process that we see approved too much, but it is possible. From there, the other big reason why this is used, when you repackage it as a Win32, it gives you a number of different options that make it easier to kind of do like your detection methods. So say, for example, you're deploying an application and you want to detect a particular registry key because you want to do a version check. Win32 apps will give you that capability within the actual console, and you can customize all those different detection methods the way that you want. The other piece that's kind of important to note when you're using autopilot in the enrollment status pages, you want to make sure that you're just using what you use, because if your environment has a mix of them, we've noticed that during the autopilot process, it can cause crashes or errors to occur. So we typically recommend to take all the LOB apps or the MSIs and repackage them as Win32s. I know that might seem a little bit counterintuitive, but a Win32 or the Intune repackager will repackage an MSI. And what's nice about that, when you repackage the MSI as a Win32, it'll actually import all of those settings for you of, like the installation and uninstallation. So feel like you don't have to do that like multiple times over. Another piece that I typically like to bring up as well, I know there are different situations where you might want to customize the packages that you're deploying. One big kind of complaint I get typically is like 7-zip, for example. You deploy the MSI package, it gets on the machine great, but then the right-click context menu is missing, and you want that feature to be available to your users. You can use software products called MCO and Advanced Installer, and I put the links in the PowerPoint. And these are third-party products that you can purchase. And what it does is it will make your app installations easier to deploy, because what it will allow you to do is you can record the executables or whatever the app is doing, create that into and create and save that as an MSI package or an MSIX if you're looking on using kind of newer Microsoft technologies. Save that and then import it into your Intune console. So if you ever have like this finicky product that just doesn't deploy very well, those are two really big alternatives that are really, really helpful in those situations of being able to do it. And it saved my bacon quite a few times, especially with some of the little bit of the archaic testing applications that sometimes need to be pushed out. Those definitely help in those areas. So if we go to slide 6, please, Garrett. So the next piece that I'd like to go over real quick is the actual packaging and assigning of the applications. And at this part, I wanted to go ahead and show you like a live demo of how to do that process. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen again and walk you through repackaging the Chrome browser and repackaging it as an Intune Win and actually importing it into the system and deploying it. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen once again. And the first thing you'll notice is that you'll need to download the content prep tool. If you'll notice, I've put that file here in this location under my C directory. This is just typically where I choose to put this type of stuff, but don't feel like you have to implicitly put it here. This is just where my workspace is. So from here, we're going to open up PowerShell. We're going to use CD to navigate to the directory that the file is in. And then we're going to type in Intune and then press Tab to complete to bring up the executable. And as you can see, it's got a period and a backslash beforehand. It's really important that you have that, because if you just type Intune when util.exe in, it'll say that it doesn't know what you're asking it to do. So from here, we're going to click that to run it. And you can see here it's asking you to please specify the source folder. So I typically will download things like here's the Chrome download for the newest stable binary. And I've got that pulled up. And then from here, I want to go into that folder where I downloaded it. And I typically call the folder a binary just because that's just how I kind of notate it's the original source file. I'll go into this installation folder, and here are my installer files. Now, sometimes Chrome and other packages will have extras that you might choose to deploy with your packages. But in this instance, I don't need the endpoint verification, and I don't need the legacy browser, and I don't want to add more space to the package than I need to. So from here, I'm going to grab this address link because this is the source directory of where that file resides. I'm going to copy and paste that into the actual PowerShell, press enter, and now it's going to ask me to specify the setup file. Well, right here is the setup file, and an easy way to pull that is just to go here, show more options, go to properties, grab the name right here, copy it, and then right click and paste it into the console. And then if it's an MSI, just put an MSI at the end. If it's an exe.exe, it's a PowerShell script.ps1, whichever that you're using. Here it'll ask you where you want to put the output folder. So I typically will put it in a folder called Intune Wins. But the other thing that you'll also notice is I typically put a date. And the reason for this is the date that I put in here typically tells me when I repackaged it last. So it's a lot easier to know when I did that update. So here we're going to put it here in 9/26/2022. I'm going to copy and paste. Specify a catalog folder. In this instance, no, but say for example, we have a much larger application that has a separate catalog folder. This is where you would specify it. And now the application is going to go through the process of compressing it and encrypting it like I referred to earlier, preparing it for you. It does take a minute. The more powerful your computer, the quicker this process will run. Now that it's completed, our package is being done. Now we can see that we've got our Intune Win file. So from here, we're going to go into our Intune console. And we're going to go into our apps, all apps, add, and we're going to select Win32. Then from here, we're going to select our application package. We're going to point it to that one that we had before. Now it recognizes the file. It's accepting it because it's telling us all the information. And now here's where we're going to fill in all the information about that application. In order to fill in the description box, you do have to click the edit description. You can't just click into it and start typing. I just wanted to notate that real quick because a lot of my customers ask about that. And also too, the description box does support I forget what the particular language is, but you can make it look a little bit prettier in here by using different types of text. So that way, in case you have an application that you want to make look a particular way in company portal, that's how you would do it. Then from here, you just go through the standard repackaging process, fill in things as you need to. I typically recommend that if you're going to make this available to your users, that you do add a logo file to it. And one of the easiest ways to do that is just honestly just Bing it, use the filter tool, click on the button that says square, and then just look for a PNG file about the application that you're running. From there, you'll click next. Oh, sorry, you have to put a publisher in here. From there, you'll choose next. See how it's auto imported all the settings from the MSI. If this was an executable, this is where I would put in my install and uninstall commands. And then another feature that's part of this, say the application is kind of tricky and you want to make sure it forces a restart afterwards. You can do that here. There, we're going to select some of our requirements. And typically, you want to choose the OS that's still serviceable and supported. And then here's where you want to put the disk space required. Now, I typically recommend putting what the expanded package or what the installed package size is. And the reason for this, if you start filling in this data, it'll actually show up in the reporting console. So that way, if you start seeing that devices are low, it'll actually tell you why, because these applications are consuming too much space. That's just a kind of a nice feature built into the package. From here, it's going to go through and ask us our detection method. Like I said, we've got the 3 different varieties because in case it doesn't make a registry entry and you just want to see that the file got put where it's supposed to be, you can do that method. But since this is an MSI, it already looks for the MSI product code. We'll click OK, click Next. Here's where we can do any dependencies in the console, and we can add these here. So say, for example, it needs Visual Studio or some of the other different pieces. You can add that in. Precedence. Say that you want to download a new version of the Google Chrome browser, and even though you've got the auto update systems running, you want it to push out a new version to everybody's machines anyway, and just make sure that it's doing that. You would use this to supersede the old version, and it will go out and replace it with the new one. And then from there, here's where we can do our assignments. So required is going to push out the required needs, or sorry, it's going to push out the required application onto the devices, and it will force install it. So if I go to Pineview Public Schools hardware, for example, back install. This is where we'll select that option. Here's where I can filter. So say, for example, I want to exclude these Surface SC devices because I don't want it to push out to them. I can use those filters that we talked about earlier. And then here's where I can show toast notifications. So say I want the user to know that it's being installed, it'll pop up and let them know. If not, we can hide it all. And then from there, we'll just go ahead and click next and push the application out. If we want to make it available to our users so that they can see it in company portal and install it on their own, we would add it here. And it's important to understand that that'll run under the system context or the user context, depending on how you to push it out. So understand, users can install admin, like software that requires admin permissions if you make it available in company portal. So from here, I'm going to stop sharing my screen again real quick. And then Garrett, if we could go to the next slide real quick. All right, and as we can see what I went through, here's how we're assigning the application, the toast notifications, the availability, and I put like a nice kind of descriptor of what all those different modes are, and when they run. But then also at the bottom, you can see what that looks like. So company portal, here's what the application looks like in your store. And then on the bottom right-hand corner, you can see here's that toast notification pop-up. So in this instance, Acrobat Reader was being deployed, and you can see that it was installed successfully. So it was notifying the users and letting them know that that application was being installed, which is just a nice, it's nice. Just a lot of our users typically, or a lot of my users typically like to know when things were happening on their machine. So that the toast notifications was a nice add-on when they finally added it to the system. All right, if we could go over to filters real quick, please. The next slide. So filters were what I was referring to earlier, and what's nice about those is you can use them to create a variety of methods. So one big reason why this is useful is you can create a filter for personal devices. So we ran into this a few times with some of our customers where they're really, really wanting to get their devices secured with like BitLocker encryption and other security policies and baselines. But the problem that they've kind of ran into is they've got the BYOD scenario running, and they also have personal devices in their tenants, which means people that have brought in the device, they've signed into it, and they allow Intune to manage the device. Well, what's nice about this is if you use the filter and you set it to personal, you can exclude your security policies from all those personal devices, which will help prevent some of those issues that you might run into where a personal device, you end up finding out their BitLocker key was stored in your environment. This is how you can make sure that none of those personal devices are touched, but you can still utilize your BYOD scenarios. The other reason why this is important too, when you apply a filter, it doesn't actually have to scan the whole directory, go through every group, confirm everything. The way that it processes and it runs through an evaluation engine. And this engine just quickly looks and sees whether or not that should apply to those devices and looks at that filter. That way it's not scanning everything like I was saying earlier and going down the list. So you'll see that filters actually will respond quicker when you're going to deploy things rather than trying to create like many different subgroups underneath. So use filters where it makes sense to kind of help reduce what you're trying to push out in certain use case scenarios. It can also be used to filter many other things. So the model, say for example, there's a particular model that you're having an issue with and you don't want BitLocker to push out to it, or say there's a particular student device that is having a problem and this new update's causing issues and you want to make sure that that's not getting pushed out. You can use those filters to break that out and make sure that you're not applying things unless you want to. Another reason is the OS version. That's another big one too. You can use that to target specific OS versions for upgrades. So say you have your different update rings and you have different users on different levels of OSs, you can use that to target those OS versions and move people up to a newer OS version based on that filtering need. If we could go to the next slide, please, Garrett. So the last piece I'm going to cover before we switch over to Garrett for the next portion is a question that I get asked a lot. And typically the questions will go something like, well, on my SCCM environment, I can right click on the collection and tell every device to check in, and whatever I deployed will just magically pull up on every machine. Keep in mind, cloud-based systems, there's a little bit of a lag. So typically we let users know that when you make a change in the system, it takes about 45 minutes to 4 hours before it perpetuates. And from there, as the device starts checking in, they check in about 45 minutes. That's when it'll start to check in and start processing the changes that you've made. So you want to quickly push out a policy change. You want to try and get to as many devices as quickly as possible. There are two methods I know that can kind of help do similarly what you're used to being able to do in your SCCM environment. You can go to the Intune for Education console, go to the actual group, and then if you scroll down, there will be a load more button. And if you keep on going down and keep hitting that load more button until all the thousands of devices are loaded, you can go up to the top and you can hit the little square checkmark box next to device name, which signifies to select all. And then you can select your action. So whether you want to restart them all, whether you want to sync them all. And what it'll do is it'll queue it up for you in the system, grab every single one and process it down the list, and it'll give you a success or failure, similar to how you're used to it in SCCM. And that'll let you know, and this is one of the ways that you can use the console to kind of accelerate a deployment. So say, you notice an application that you pushed out is causing a lot of major issues. You want to stop the deployment, cancel it, and you want to uninstall it. You can cancel the deployment, remove the deployment requirement in the application, and then come in here, set it to uninstall, and then force push that change out real quick. So the other piece that you can do is the bulk device actions console, which is located under devices and Windows devices. And then from there, it's on the top right-hand corner. And as you can see in the photo, from there, what you can do is it'll let you check mark box the devices that you want to apply it to. And then you select the action that you want to apply it to those devices. Now, I know that might seem like it's a little bit longer, which it is, but it's a lot better than having to go into each and every device and clicking into it manually and clicking the process you want, then going to the next one, clicking the next one, and clicking it again. It just saves on the extra button clicks when you're going into that system. So in case you ever just need to push out a quick update or something's really bothering you, you would feel more comfortable if you could get the systems to check in quickly. These are the two best known ways that I know to get the system to check in as quickly as possible. And I also always like to notate, if you need the user to get software immediately, just let them know to reboot. After you apply the application, wait about 10 minutes, ask them to reboot their computer a couple of times, and after that, Intune will definitely pick up on it as well, in case asking your users to restart is an option in your environment. So I've covered bulk device changes, and Garrett, I'm ready to hand it over to you so that we can go over GPOs and Intune CSPs.
Awesome. Thanks, Tyler. So the next topic that we wanted to cover was migrating Windows 10 GPOs to Intune CSPs. When we think about our devices that we have on-prem today, so if you've got devices that are in Active Directory and you're pushing policies with them, typically with group policy, that group policy can tweak the end user experience to what we wish, right? As IT admins, we typically want to either make things simpler for our end users or tweak specific policies so that our tools and systems can work efficiently together. And so one of the key pieces that we tend to get some resistance on when talking about Azure AD Join and moving to Intune is group policy, because group policy does not exist as it is on-prem in Intune. We talked on the 101 session about configuration profiles and setting the settings that we typically would with group policy. And even bringing in ADMX template support within those configuration profiles. But sometimes it can be a lengthy process to recreate all of that and start from scratch. So we actually have built a couple of tools inside of Intune for you to number one, analyze what group policies are on a machine, and number two, help you actually migrate. So the way that it works is, as you can see on the slide, you can actually go to your client or server, wherever you've got the group policy management console that you're probably familiar with, and you can export the group policies that you have targeted to a specific OU or whatever policies you have built in your environment. Then there's a tool that we have in Intune called Group Policy Analytics. And the Group Policy Analytics tool will allow you to import that XML, and then it's going to do the analysis for you. And what's super cool about this is it's actually going to analyze that group policy and number one, tell you if it's supported in Intune, or B, if it's deprecated, maybe, right? Maybe it's an older setting that you shouldn't be deploying anymore or something like that. But it'll actually help you map the corresponding MDM policy for group policy. And you can get this in a nice report. And then if you choose to, you actually can migrate. You can migrate those settings and it'll actually create the policies for you, which you can then target to your devices. I have as a subsection of this slide right there at the end, the big question of should you migrate all group policies to Intune? I'm going to tell you the answer is no. And I want you to think about this for a minute because group policy has been around for a long, long time. I'm going to say something that's somewhat controversial. It's actually been around longer than I've been alive. So think about that for a little bit. And a lot of us have inherited systems where group policy has been in place for a really long time, and some of those policies have existed for a long time. So if you're new to your environment and you're assessing if a cloud native environment is a good fit, it's a great opportunity for you to stop and say, what are we actually doing with group policy? And do I need to keep doing it? This group, I'll actually do a quick demo of this and show you what it looks like. But think about how long you have had some of these GPOs in place in your environment, and take the opportunity to clean that up and really assess, is this necessary? So in the next slide, these are the directions for you to actually go and perform the same steps, but I'm going to share my screen really quick and we'll walk through this together. All right. So if you can see my screen, Tyler, are we good? Can you see my screen?
We are good.
Awesome. So I'm actually going to pull open my domain controller here on my lab. And you can see that I've got some group policy objects in my lab. What I'm able to do is come down to the group policy objects node within the group policy management console. I can right click on this and then do a save report. And I can export this as an XML file. So let's see if I can't zoom in because I'm remoted. When we save this to a share, we can then upload this into Intune. So I've already got one pre-saved and uploaded into Intune. So all we have to do is save that as an XML file, and then we can come into our Microsoft Endpoint Management console and import those XML files. So I'm going to come in here. Actually, let me show you where you get to this. If you go home in Endpoint Manager and you go to Devices, on the left-hand side, you'll see Group Policy Analytics Preview. There's an import button right up at the top here. Import. Click the file that you want to import. I've got my backup right here, so I'm going to navigate to this report. And you can see it takes just a minute for it to process, and then it'll import. What'll actually happen is it'll come in. I've actually imported the same thing, right? And you can see that I'm automatically given some information about the policy name. So it's got the policy name and then NDM support. 100%. If I click on that 100%, it's gonna bring this and give me an exact listing of all the policies that exist in that policy. It'll tell you, hey, this one's actually been deprecated. We don't need this one anymore. Or we've got full support for this, yes. And then you can see on the far right-hand side here, and it's kind of cut off because of the columns here, but it'll actually map the specific CSP. You could actually download this into a spreadsheet so that you can go and you can talk with your help desk, talk with other stakeholders within your environment, and kind of assess which policies actually have NDM support, what do we need, and then how you can build this out. So really great options for you to just analyze what is in your environment. We also have a pre-built report. So if you go into reports, let me go into reports here. There's a group policy analytics preview report. This is actually going to give you a nice migration report that says, okay, yes, from the user scope for this particular policy, it is ready for migration, right? You can filter this out as you need, but again, just a great option for you to review with other stakeholders in your environment so that we're not making those decisions independently. Now, again, right, this is really cool to be able to see, okay, here's what policies exist in my environment, and here's the support that we've got within Intune to be able to do this. You'll notice that there's a migrate column right here that we just check the box, and we can come up here to migrate. If we migrate, it will actually create a configuration profile for us with all of the policies that we choose to include in that profile. Okay. It's actually going to leverage the settings catalog and create the profile for you so you can assign it to the groups that you want. Again, the option is there, right? Should you do it? Maybe, right? There may be really good reason to do this because it's going to simplify the experience to help you get onboarded to the cloud faster with those new devices. But again, you may just want to rethink some of the things and just identify, say, hey, you know what, we may not need this anymore. Let's not deploy this if we don't need to. So I show this to you as a cautionary tool. Just be mindful about what you're doing. Now, along the same
One thing
lines.
real quick, Garrett.
Yeah.
That I just wanted to mention. So kind of think of this too, as you're going through like this modern management kind of change, kind of try and think of it as like a fresh slate if you want it to be. Like for the first time in 20 or 30 years, if you want to just look at what the devices need to function and then work your way up from there, you can just restart from scratch without having to kind of pull in some of these old environments that you might not have been aware of or around when it was implemented.
100%. Yeah, great call out, Tyler. All right, so the next thing that I wanted to show you was along the same lines as group policy. We're able to obviously import those profiles, but if there are ADMX templates that you're leveraging in your environment to manage other applications or services that are not from Microsoft, how does that work? Well, you're in luck because as of last month, I believe last month or 2 months ago, we have released the ability to import specific ADMX template files into the Intune management console. This is really exciting because we can upload those templates. Typically, I see this with Chrome. I see this with Firefox. Zoom, some other applications like that you may have in your environment. We can now import those ADMX templates and have full support for these cloud native desktops. I will do a quick shout out on Chrome. I've imported it here for just for simplicity purposes. But what's really cool is we've actually included the Chrome templates automatically in the settings catalog for you. So you can actually do this without importing the ADMX tool. Which is kind of cool. Awesome. So to get here, all we do is go into our devices node and then go to configuration profiles, and you're going to see all your configuration profiles here. And then up at the top, there's a new tab that says import ADMX. So we can click that. I can come in here and click import, and then I can actually navigate to, got some downloading here. You can see that I've got a Firefox template, and I'm going to rename it for demo purposes really quick.
And it's important to note real quick, if you're on an Intune Autopilot joined only device, you'll need to manually connect to the domain controller and group policy to do this, or have a hybrid joined device to still be able to access the policies. So just in case you're on an Intune and Autopilot only device and you're not understanding why you can't see that, that's why.
Awesome. So right now, those ADMX templates, again, once you have those ADMX templates downloaded, you can save them anywhere, and then upload the ADMX template itself and the ADML file, the corresponding ADML file. Right now, today, only the English language is supported, so just be aware of that if that is an issue for your environment. Once we walk through the quick wizard, we can upload this, and then as soon as it's ready to go, it'll be marked as available. So you can see the success here. And then what's really nice is being able to go back into devices, into configuration profiles. If I go and create a profile, I can come down to Windows 10 and later, choose templates, and there's a new option here called imported admin templates. So I can click create and I can say Mozilla. And then you'll notice that the Firefox templates are now there. And I can interact them and create the specific profiles that I need for my devices as needed. So there is one other issue when creating or importing the ADMX templates themselves. In some cases, there may be dependencies. So you'll actually find if you attempt to import the Firefox ADMX template, it will actually fail because first you have to import the Mozilla ADMX template. We have that listed in our documentation, which is noted in the deck. When you get the deck and the recording after this live session, just review that and you'll see it in the notes there. But quick call out. I'm so excited about this. I think this is going to block a lot of customers from moving to the cloud because we want to ensure that our students are safe across all browsers, not just the Edge browser, right? And this really opens that door. So really cool to be able to analyze our group policies, see what we're deploying, migrate those over if necessary, and then import those ADMX templates for third parties. All right. Let's see the next one, and I'm just going to keep my demo box open. The next one is local administrators. So as IT admins, we want to be able to manage our devices at the local admin level. As IT, we need to troubleshoot sometimes, and that's going to require admin rights. Again, when we're thinking about group policy, we typically inherit the local admin rights through group policy for our machines based on our specific memberships in Active Directory. It's not going to work for Azure AD joined machines, right? It's not going to work in that same fashion. So we do need to designate who the local administrators are going to be for Azure AD devices. So what we're going to do is we're going to navigate to Azure AD, the Azure AD portal itself, and we are going to the left-hand side to devices. Then we're going to click device settings. Device settings, you're going to see this link at the bottom here, and I'll zoom in for you. That says additional local administrators on all Azure AD joined machines. It says additional because automatically all global admins in the tenant are local admins to Azure AD joined machines. So we can manage additional local admins for those who aren't global admins, as it's a best practice to not have a lot of global admins in your tenant. So you'll notice that it brings me to now a device administrator's role within Azure AD and an assignment. So we can actually come in here and say add assignments, and then we can select our good friend AC Slater, and we can make him a local admin to Azure AD joined devices. And all that looks like is assigning this role of device administrator to this user. When we do this, it's going to make this user local admin for all Azure AD joined devices in your environment, all of them. There is a way to scope it and get more granular with Windows 10 20H2 and later via a local users and groups NDM policy. And so there's not a great UI to do this yet. It's coming, but I wanted to provide the documentation that if you are looking to add your site techs or your campus technicians as local admins for these devices, this may be a better option. Otherwise, you will just want to add your help desk staff and some of those other folks that need to be local admins on all machines as a device administrator. That's pretty much it. It's fairly simple, but it's a great call out for troubleshooting the devices that we are working on and starting to play around with in Azure AD. Jesse has a great question. Can this be used in conjunction with PIM for temporary one-off access as needed? Yes. All right. Next portion is mapped drives. So this one is more of an advanced configuration that I wanted to call out because I think it's a great step in the modernization journey from an end user perspective. This tells them, I still have access to some of the content that I need without disrupting my entire world, right? And so I like this solution just because it gives you an opportunity to explore the scripts feature within Intune, as well as ensure that our end users have time to migrate over to more modern solutions. I will call out that by mapping a network drive on premises, that defeats the purpose of a cloud native Windows endpoint, right? We want to try to move away from mapped drives and start leveraging modern solutions like Teams, OneDrive, and SharePoint to handle documentation, repositories, and file management and things like that. I think naturally, especially after COVID, we're seeing a lot of movement towards OneDrive and Teams and SharePoint naturally due to remote work and remote learning. But if you haven't adopted those tools yet, sometimes there can be a learning curve there for our end users, and it takes time to train our end users. And so as you move towards cloud native Windows endpoints, it might make sense to temporarily map a network drive so that you can see this in file explorer and our end users can get to the content that they know and love. So I just wanted to share this with you, the way that this works. There is no support in Intune for group policy preferences. So really, we talked about group policy analytics. We talked about importing third-party ADMX templates into Intune, but group policy preferences are one of the outlying features of group policy that have not shifted over. There's not a supported feature set in Intune to create anything with group policy preferences, and that's typically where drive maps come from. So assuming that our identities are synchronized, right, that we've got them living both on premises and in Azure AD, the authentication is going to work on an Azure AD joined device. But the way that we map a drive might look a little bit different. And so I want to introduce you to the scripts feature within Intune. So if we come into Endpoint Manager, we go to Devices. On the left-hand side under Policy, there's a scripts feature. And we can add scripts. We have scripts support for both Windows 10 and Mac OS. So if you want to do bash scripts and things like that, we have the capability of doing it. I'm going to give this policy a name, drive mapping, and I'm going to map to a PowerShell script. I've got this downloaded here. And I've actually provided this PowerShell script for you. And I'll show you what it looks like in just a moment when we do this. But you can copy and paste that, save it as PS1, and follow along with me once you get the deck. But you will essentially, we're going to create a scheduled task through PowerShell that's going to map the network drive. The trick here is that we do want to run this script as a logged in, using the logged in credentials, right, for the individual that is logged into the computer because we're mapping that specific drive that they have rights to. We can skip the enforced signature check and the run script in 64 PowerShell host because we don't really need that. And then we can assign this to a group as we normally would. Let me jump over to my tenant here.
Really quick, Garrett, I just wanted to mention,
Yeah.
if you do have security policies in place that do disable PowerShell and the command prompt systems, these will have issues running. Just as an FYI.
Is that a Windows SE plug there?
It's not just SE. They can also disable it with an app blocker policy, which some universities do.
Yeah, absolutely great call out, Tyler. So this is actually the demo virtual machine that I deployed together with you all on the last call that was enrolled in Autopilot Azure AD joined strictly. If I pull this up, you can see that this is Azure AD joined. And this script has already been deployed to this machine. So you'll notice that there is, if we go into Task Scheduler, if we just go into the main library, you'll notice that there's a map network drive with specific triggers and actions to map the drive. And what this looks like is at logon, when the user logs in, they will actually see their shared drive pop up or their home drive or whatever it looks like. Again, assuming that the identities are synchronized and you've got permissions set on the folders appropriately, you should have full access to this document. I can come in here and create new folders as needed. I've got full rewrite capabilities. And so again, we don't necessarily want to tie these cloud native Windows endpoints to an on-premise technology, right? Because as soon as this device leaves the network and doesn't have access to line of sight or to that domain controller or anything like that, you'll lose access. So it really does defeat the purpose of a cloud native Windows endpoint. But I do want to call out that it is possible to do as a great transition for our end users when modernizing and kind of break the stigma that just because it's not an Active Directory joined machine, we can still map our drives. So really cool. Again, I've shared that PowerShell script with you guys in the deck, and that's pretty much all there is to it. But I think it's really cool that we're still able to do this for our end users, especially like for shared drives and things like that. Home drives are usually pretty easy to migrate over to like OneDrive because it is one-to-one, but shared drives and G drives, common drives, things like that, typically take a little bit more work. So really great option here for you to test out PowerShell scripts. Again, if you find that there's something that doesn't exist in group policy, if you find that there's an application that you need to deploy that's not, doesn't have an actual installer and you tend to deploy it with a script, you can actually use the scripts feature to do a lot of different things. You can see like I've turned off Teams auto start, removed built-in apps within Windows, right? Lots of different ways that we could use scripts feature within Intune. All right.
Be very cautious with lower powered devices and trying to run a lot of PowerShell scripts at the same time.
Cool. So let's pull this back up. And Tyler, I'll kick it over to you to talk about Universal Print.
Sure. All right. So we've got the slide pulled up. Okay. So I do have some exciting news with this. So this is Universal Print, and I'm going to go over kind of how it works. But in our future presentation, at the end, we're going to include a survey. And if we get enough feedback, I actually have one of the project managers that developed the product within Microsoft that will actually do a future presentation with us to help deploy it. But what Universal Print is. So Universal Print is included in your A3 and A5 packages that are built into the M365 stack today. And what that is it installs a service that's in your Azure tenant, gives you access to a connector that you would install on your print server. And how this works is that connector talks to the SQL database that's usually utilized by print servers or the Windows print server today. And it'll tap into that and it'll read the user identities and it'll tap into the print queues that are on the local server. And so what will happen is when people go to print, you will publish this universal printer to your directory, similar to how it is with on-prem, but it would show up under the available printers in the printer's location on the computer. And I wish I could show this part, but this one's going to be a little bit more complicated until we get like the full environment set up. But more or less what will happen is it'll tap into that queue, and when they go and print, it'll tap into a connector on the local PC, take that print job, send it up to the cloud, Azure processes it, relays it back down on premise, sends it to the print server, and then prints it. And so what's really nice about this is universal print can be mapped similarly to how you've mapped printers in the past. So say you have devices that are in labs and you only want to deploy these certain printers to students in certain lab scenarios. Universal print will give you that capability. Not only that, but you can also set it up to discover nearby printers if you want to. So say, for example, it's looking at the IP data and it sees that there's another printer nearby. You can configure the universal print system to show that as the default like main option. It manages everything within the Azure portal. And once again, I unfortunately can't share that piece just yet. But what happens is in the Azure portal, it actually shows you a print management console. And what this does is in the print management console, it shows you every print job, who printed it, when, how large the file it is, what type of file it is, and it'll give you all kind of the data on what it is. It'll also show you if for any reason it failed, it was interrupted, if anything happened, you'll have a report similar to like the on-prem print systems of what happened to those print jobs. And universal print is a nice way to kind of bridge that gap. Now, I do want to notate one kind of, it's not a limitation of universal print, but in your A3 and A5 bundle packages, you get 100 printed jobs per month. Now, that's not based on pages, that's based on jobs. So when you use these systems and implement them, you push it out, and each user more or less has a bucket of 100 print jobs for the month. Now, say you want more than that, Microsoft has the ability for you to do an add-on, and it adds however many more print jobs you think you might need into a pool, and then people just deduct from that pool. And this really simplifies kind of like future print systems because the connection to on-prem can be sporadic. Like there are ways within the Intune console to deploy on-prem printers, but because the identities aren't the same, and more than likely because the certificate trust hasn't been created, try to connect to them the old-fashioned way can be problematic. So the universal print is designed to kind of help fill in that gap. And if you look on the documentation here, we support a large amount of different printing solutions. And we also support methods where they need to do badge printing. So say, for example, you have a user that needs to print something, but they cannot have it show up until they go up and swipe their badge on the device. This is capable of doing that. So I see Dan says you're charging me to print documents. No, the first 100 are included in the month. They're free. It's just if you want to use that feature outside of that, you do need to pay for the ingress and egress. Because keep in mind, say the computer is at home and somebody prints something and they want it on the printer ready for them in the morning to print. It's got to relay it through Azure, and we do charge customers for that portion. So if we could go to the next slide, Garrett. So the next piece that I want to go over is the Surface Management Portal. So it's really kind of important to understand that Surface devices are natively integrated with into Intune. So we build this product stack, we manage it. It's our baby, it's our ecosystem. So Surface devices are custom made to integrate with those systems a lot more efficiently. And to kind of help with that, the Microsoft Surface Management Portal was designed and was added to your tenants to help with those situations. So I'm going to go through a quick demo of it, and I'm going to show you what that looks like and what you're able to do within that console. Let me go ahead and share my screen. And let me know if everyone can see my screen okay.
Looks good.
Perfect. All right, so here's the Surface Management Portal. So from here, we can look at all of our different devices, where their warranties are at, if any of them are expiring, which ones are in coverage, and everything that's going on in terms of a coverage status. And if you purchase Surface as a service, or if you purchase warranty packages for your Surface devices, you don't have to do anything to add it into this portal. It automatically shows up for you. The same way, if you onboard Surface devices through Intune and Autopilot, no extra steps are needed. They're automatically imported into this console. And that makes the whole deployment cycle and the management cycle of devices so much easier because you have this nice portal to just bring it all up. So say you have a device that has a problem and you want to take care of it. You can come in here, select the device, do a new support request, come in here, select the particular model it is. You actually come in, you select the specific device as it is in Intune because it gives all the information about it. And then you click next. All right, we've got a warranty problem on it. Screen is broken. Leave a photo. I would upload a photo. Then I would have two contacts of who could handle it. That way, in case somebody's out and somebody else has to pick up the task after that. And then I review and submit the case. What's nice about this is Microsoft has a turnaround time of 4 to 10 business days, typically on the lower side, and they re-add the device back into your Intune and Autopilot console for you. So you don't have to go through a manual re-enrollment process. It will just show up back in your console, ready to redeploy within that environment. Makes it so much easier when you're having to deal with devices that might have been broken, or you might have gotten a few DOAs when you do like a large device order, or you might have a situation where the teacher cracked the screen, it was their fault, but you need to bill them for it. You can use this portal to do all of that. It's just a really nice way to get a very bullet points overview of what's going on with all the surfaces in your environment. You don't have to pay for this additionally. It's included with every Surface purchase, automatically integrates in the portals, and it just makes those processes so much easier. You don't have to ask your techs to go out and get like Microsoft Tech certified. They don't have to go in and go through any like particular like training procedures. Like it's simplified, and I find that the return on investment with this saves our customers so much time in the long run because they don't have to go through all those extra steps. I would remember situations in the past where I would spend hours and hours on the phone with HP or Dell trying to just get like 4 or 5 devices shipped back to get them repaired. They'd make me run the diagnostic tool. They'd make me go through all these steps, and by the time I spent probably 4 to 6 hours on one darn computer because they made me go through all these steps. The Surface Management Portal, they're not going to go through that whole long drawn about process. They're just going to ask what's wrong with the device, what's broken, and what needs to be done to repair it. And we're also, as we go through our initiatives to make devices easier to repair, we're going to also be adding different features in here so that you can order parts in the future, especially for those SE devices. So say, for example, you want to get a new part for a particular Surface model, you can come through this portal in the near future, order the parts, and have them on stock and on hand if you so choose. So it's just a nice way that Microsoft's trying to show our initiatives to making devices repairable for users. Now, while screens are a little bit more complicated, like we're trying to get to a point where batteries can be removed, where the SSDs can be removed, where like the basic components that typically fail first, we're trying to make it so that users can repair those pieces on their own. And that'll be over time as we redevelop all these new systems. So as we make new announcements, you'll start to see more and more devices are going to start following that trend where they're more user serviceable. I'm going to go ahead and stop sharing my screen. And then let's go through, Garrett, if it's all right, to the second slide for the Surface Management Portal, please. So this slide right here includes all the information on how to access it. It's literally go to all devices and click on the Surface Management Portal button right here over on the right-hand side. That's all you have to do. It's 2 simple button clicks. And then this gives you a step-by-step guide on how to go through this process and when the devices are added to your tenant. So once again, like this is just a really, really great way to manage those Surface devices and make it easier long-term to maintain them because it's so much easier to go through click, click, click. This is what's wrong with it. Next, and done. I have to go through a bunch of extra steps. All right, so the other piece that we typically get asked, and Garrett, if we could go through the next slide, is troubleshooting. So a lot of our customers ask, how do I troubleshoot this? It's not like I can do like the standard go into, like the event viewer I see on my domain controller and try and see what the machines were doing. Now you're going to be looking at the event viewer that's locally to the machine, as well as using the collect diagnostics panel that's native to the Intune console. Now, a couple of distinctions I'd like to make real quick. So event viewer logs are different and separate logs from config manager. So I know you're probably used to in the past where config manager had its own separate section for logs and what it was processing, what it was doing. The new systems don't use that. They use the typical event viewer that's local on the machine. And the Intune management extension does write some things custom similar to config manager, but it's not nearly as many. You're typically going to be using the event viewer to look locally on the devices. Now, when you're collecting diagnostics in the system, that's where you can use Intune to pull diagnostics off the machine. And in the photos that you see shown here, you can see those buttons. And in a moment, I'll go do a demo real quick and show you. But then locally on the device, you can also export your management log file. So say you're looking at some of the autopilot and configuration policy stuff, that's where you're going to export it. And then on the bottom left-hand corner, we have a website that will give you access to the file that you'll need to export these particular logs. And then once that's done, it will give you access to all these different log files that will allow you to analyze and see what's going on with that application. Now, also in the Intune Management Console, when applications fail, the console itself will give you some basic information. It's not always a like when you're using Win32 apps. With MSIs, it's typically a pass or fail, but with Win32 apps, you get a lot more granular control and reporting for troubleshooting. And that's another reason why we typically recommend Win32 apps. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen again. I'm going to walk through some of the troubleshooting steps that we would see in the console. And so we're going to go over here to devices. Okay, we don't want to save that. Go over to Windows. Let's just choose a device. So let's choose this one. And it's super simple. It's this collect diagnostics button right here. Click this, click yes. And the next time that the machine checks in and connects to the internet, it will download the log files and import them into the console for you to download later on and view. That's how you'll do it via this method. Now, the other way that you're going to be able to collect logs is via Event Viewer. I'm wondering if I can show that. There you go, Event Viewer. Event Viewer is the other local tool that you'll be able to use to see what's going on. Typically, you'll be looking under the application event logs and the system event logs. Probably going to take a moment. And here, you can see what the errors are, specifically what happened, and typically some sort of error code that you can look up. And you can export this information, you can filter the logs. So yeah, Event Viewer is still alive and well and can be used on Intune and Autopilot devices. So those are just the two kind of quick, easy ways to kind of go through like getting logs off the local devices. And then, yeah, this is probably the easiest way right now to do diagnostics. And I'm trying to think real quick too, because I don't think I have, no, I actually do have an app installation failure I can show you. Teams. This one failed. So I can see the reason why this one failed is because the application was not detected after installation. So what that tells me is that either one of two things. Either my detection method failed, and the way that it validates that the software was installed properly isn't being detected properly, or the application actually didn't get installed, and when it looked to look at that directory, that registry key, or the other thing that it can look for, it won't be able to validate that it's been installed. So this console will give you some information so you don't have to locally go on the machines or go pouring through logs. Some of the basic stuff will show up in the console and you can see why. So I just wanted to show this piece, and this part of the system is super important. All right, Garrett, if we could get over to the next slide for remote help, please.
Yeah, and one quick question in the chat was, where do the logs show up in Intune after they've been collected? Do you want to answer that?
Yes. It'll show up in the reports in the monitoring section where you can see where those are imported.
Yeah, I actually think there was an update recently where it will notify you that those files are ready to download, and then you can just download those
Yeah,
files
it'll show up
locally.
on the top right hand. Yeah, you're right, Garrett. It'll also
Yep.
pop up on the top right hand corner with the little bell, and then it'll show you there.
Yeah, exactly.
All right, so one feature I'm really excited to kind of let people know in the education sector. So remote help is actually a new system that we've created to assist users with remote control and remote assistance scenarios. And this is actually included in the A1, A3, A5 SKUs now. So on the corporate side, they have to pay for this now as a premium SKU add-on. Like they have to pay for this for each user. Microsoft actually included this feature for free, or not free, but included it in the bundle SKUs for A1, A3, and A5. So you don't have to pay anything additional to utilize this feature today if you're on the modern M365 SKUs. And what remote help does is it is a secure cloud-based help desk type of system that allows you to connect between two different computers anywhere that an active internet connection works. So say, for example, the laptop was shipped out and they're on vacation and they're down in Florida, but they've got a good internet connection and they're having an issue with their device, and you're back home, say, in Nevada. You can use remote help to remotely communicate with that device, control it, and then you override the UAC prompts to install software, make admin changes, or do what you need to. It also follows your role-based access controls. So if you have security in place and you only want certain people to do certain things, you can control that in the console and only assign certain administrative rights to people. So the other piece that I'll also give you is compliance warnings to let them know if their device is out of compliance, and you can let that to go in and like make whatever changes needed to be to make sure that device is compliant again. Say for example, BitLocker, and it's been deployed, and BitLocker for some strange reason is not implementing right. It won't activate. You could use this remote assistance into that person's machine while they're on the session with you. Go in, make that admin change, sync their BitLocker key up to the cloud, and go on about your business. The other piece that this does as well is the more that you utilize this utility, the more that you can trust it, because if you've got your pictures, your company name, and other things filled out within your M365 tenant, it will show up on the remote help photo. So if you look at the screen share right here, you can see that it shows the email address, it shows who it is, and you'll know by the domain that you can trust that account. So there's just a nice huge feature that we've announced recently, and we've added it to this product stack. I've included 2 links in the bottom left-hand corner. One, the initial overview, and the Microsoft Mechanics video. It actually shows you what it is and gives a little bit more detailed information about the feature. It does not need a VPN to function. Microsoft handles all the back-to-back relay of information and tokens, so that way it's pure cloud. You do not need a VPN to function with this. Okay, Garrett. Well, I think it's time to pass it back on to you. I have to rush through a couple things. I'm sorry.
That's okay. In fact, I think we're at a great point. So, the last portion of this is talking about endpoint security. And again, this is one of the areas that we could talk about probably for 5 days in depth, right? So just a few key points. And again, thinking about your getting started journey with Azure AD Join devices and cloud native management with Intune. Again, we are leveraging the built-in Windows Defender platform for antivirus, and then we have other security components to consider, things like firewall, things like BitLocker encryption, disk encryption, things like that. And so what we've built inside of Intune is an endpoint security node, which really summarizes all of the security features that you want to be able to deploy for your end users on these devices. So again, when we think about security, that it's just this breadth, right? And I really like this graph that's shown in the deck here about how IT ops admins, which typically control the MEM console or do device management, along with our security admins who really think about threat hunting and think about policies and how we're going to respond to certain events. We have to work together, right? And so we've got a variety of tools. We know that Microsoft is a security company now. I think we've had with the OETC group a great security 101 session, some quick wins based on your licensing. But when it comes to endpoints, we really want to focus on these key areas, which is keeping the OS patched with Windows Update for Business, which we talked about in the last session. But then we want to be able to manage our virus definitions. We want to ensure that our firewalls is configured correctly and that we're thinking about disk encryption. We can obviously get more advanced, and Tyler's going to do a brief introduction into Defender for Endpoint, which is really layering on the capabilities of the built-in Defender agent within Windows. But just know that within the endpoint security node within Intune, you've got a lot of capabilities on your hand. We also really try to harp on a lot conditional access, which is going to evaluate the device health in order to access resources, right? So we could actually say, is this device patched? If not, then we're going to block access to email or to Teams or something like that. And then it allows the end user to go and update their device to the latest version so that we are ensuring that our company is being protected. And so that's a little outside the scope of the call, but I want to bring your attention to it so that you're aware that these tools do exist. So again, for the purposes of just getting started, I provided you some sample getting started points on how to create your Defender antivirus profile. Within the endpoint security node, you'll actually see that there's an antivirus section and you can build a configuration profile just like we've done now a few different times. It's just going to be specific for Microsoft Defender. You might already be deploying this out in your environment today. And a lot of those settings you can tweak on your own. But these are just some standard recommendations to start. Same thing with firewall. The firewall differs vastly between organizations, so I can't recommend all of the firewall settings for you to set, but I can tell you how to do it. And so as a first step when you're starting with these new Azure AD join devices, ensuring that you've got the firewall configured properly in your environment is going to be key. And then the second thing is that I wanted to call out around the firewall is we actually have a migration tool. So again, think about like group policy analytics. We kind of have a similar ability with firewall rules. Firewall rules are sometimes difficult to manage, but you can actually take a source machine that has your current firewall rules deployed on it, and there's a tool that we have that you can run on that box. It'll collect those tools and upload them into Intune for you, so you don't have to recreate the wheel with all those firewall rules. Again, ensuring a quick adoption of cloud native management within Windows. So that link is in this deck. Again, you can point to it. It's fairly straightforward to do. You do need to have Intune admin rights to be able to do that and local admin rights on the machine, but it's a great tool to get you started. And then finally, disk encryption. So I do want to call out that we do disk encryption for macOS and Windows devices, but for specifically Windows, we've got BitLocker support within Microsoft Endpoint Manager. So we can actually create those profiles. We can encrypt the drives, and then the recovery keys themselves, we actually can upload those directly into Azure AD and Intune and get those recovery keys if you need. So if you're using BitLocker today to encrypt your drives, then this should be a great experience for you. We've really streamlined some things there, but these links should be able to help you get started. Again, I didn't want to give you the specific recommendations because it's going to differ per organization. So I just linked out to where you can go learn more, but I would highly encourage checking that out. And so then Tyler, I think you wanted to talk about Defender for Endpoint for a little bit.
Yes, I wanted to go through Defender for a minute. Yep. All right, so this is typically a pretty common question that we're kind of getting these days because protecting our endpoints is very important. So Microsoft has the Defender for Endpoint P1 and P2 add-on that's available for purchase, and sorry, let me turn my camera. That's available for purchase. It's also included in the A5 product stack, and the A3 product stack, I believe, includes P1, but I'd need to validate that. So what Defender for Endpoint is it actually will use the advanced threat protection systems that you're used to today, and that's why the name is changing. So anytime you see advanced threat protection, keep in mind it's going to be broken up: Defender for Identity, Defender for Endpoint, Defender for Office 365. And those features will integrate into your security console. And I'm going to show you that real quick because I know we're getting near the end of time. And so this is the security console. And this is the security console for M365 Defender. Now, what's really nice is with Intune and Autopilot devices, it is super, super simple to onboard them into this console when you're already utilizing it today. All you literally have to do is go over to your devices, configuration profiles. There is actually a configuration profile built within the Intune console to onboard the devices for you. Let's go into this real quick. And you can see that it will onboard the device into your Defender for ATP environment, and you can set the other different options as you need. And I typically like to expedite the telemetry reporting frequency so that way it's checking in more often and giving me more data. And I specifically filter the SE devices because I don't want this policy to apply to them because they kind of run their own security. So this is a really kind of great way to be able to scale devices, implement the security with them quickly and efficiently without having to go through all these extra steps with like a PowerShell script and all these other deployment methods. It's literally an easy policy you deploy in the console and it shows up within your security systems. And this will also give you recommendations on how to help protect your environment in the future. It'll show you the malware that it's remediating. It'll show you the active devices that this is on. It'll show you what it's doing. And it'll show you any users that are at risk that might be a problem in your environment. And if you use the A5 stack, that'll actually allow you to create auto remediation policies to deal with these situations automatically. So it's a really nice extra feature set that we've added to these capabilities, that we've added to the product stack to be able to manage all of these devices anywhere, anytime with advanced threat protection and making sure that you're able to support these environments in real time. And it's just a great feature to be able to use these systems and monitor the endpoints. The other piece too is it'll give you nice ways to do reporting. You can simulate attacks. There's all sorts of different ways that the system can be utilized to help better protect your environment. And it'll constantly give you recommendations on how you can improve your security score, which overall is your representation of your security posture within your organization. It's just a great tool and feature to have. That was just my quick little thing on Defender, and we will be going more in depth on that one in the future.
Awesome, thanks, Tyler. So again, we need to leave a little bit of time for Q&A. So I just wanted to end the series by saying, I think I laid it out on the last call, steps to take on, your POC and start looking at the modern management tools all across the stack on what might fit where in your environment, where you take some steps back and kind of assess what you're trying to accomplish, where it fits in your environment. So I would still follow this guide. But what I want to call out is that when we talk about modernizing endpoints, everyone's journey is a little bit different. There's no right or wrong way on how to modernize as long as you are taking steps to modernize. And so maybe that starts with taking advantage of cloud files and services like with Teams, SharePoint, OneDrive. Maybe that's starting with provisioning a few devices through Autopilot. Maybe that's lighting up Defender for Endpoint, right? Whatever the case may be, that roadmap looks a little bit different for everyone. And so hopefully this has given you some steps to kind of get started and play with Intune, with Microsoft Endpoint Manager, and help you modernize your endpoint management strategies and devices in your environment. As always, we've got lots of extra links. I do want to call out specifically, we've got an EDU endpoint office hours that everyone here can sign up for, where it's my team that hosts a biweekly call. We talk about endpoint management, what's new, what's up and coming, deep dives into specific things. So feel free to register for that. And then we also have a standard education office hours, which we cover the Microsoft 365 stack. So again, just thank you so much for your time. There is a brief survey that we would love for you guys to fill out. Let us know how we did, if this was helpful, and we'll be here to answer any questions.
Oh, real quick, Garrett, did we mention that we added the little survey thing at the bottom?
Did.
So if anybody doesn't mind just taking a few minutes to go ahead and fill out that survey, that's going to really help us know in the future what to kind of prepare and what you're kind of looking for us to go deeper in terms of like technical guidance. We'd really appreciate the feedback.